Welcome to the Deep Collaboration Podcast. My name is Max Andoctor, and I'm the co-founder and CTO of CoScreen. In today's episode, I will be talking to Sherif Abushadi and Wyndham from Near. Near is an open source platform that accelerates the development of decentralized applications. Sherif is a teacher in the Near community, and Willem is a software developer. Together, they will share their experience on the importance of visibility in remote working and how to create ad hoc open communication to solve problems on the spot. I hope you enjoy it. First, Sherif, can you tell me a bit more about yourself and what you do at Near?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Max. So I've been building software for about 20 years, and I've been teaching adults how to do the same. I've taught, I guess, over 4,000 adults in person, and have worked in various roles as from developer to architect and CTO. Once CTO. With hundreds of companies, including many of the Fortune 100. So for me, the interesting thing about what I do is that I engage with people in the moment of where they get confused and sort of help them through that. That moment, I think there's a lot happening in it, and it's quite an interesting moment for me. So I'm exploring that at Near now, and it's an amazing world, actually, this Web3 world.
Yeah, and we're going to get to talking about Near in a minute, because of course this aspect of teaching, I think, is something that's very important to what you do there. But first of all, Willem, can you tell me a bit more about what you do at Near?
Yeah, so I'm part of the contract runtime team. So basically the team that helps make sure that smart contracts compile and run on our system. We use WebAssembly, so all the tooling and development that goes into making these WebAssembly contracts, and that also includes having to figure out the best way to explain how to use our tooling, and that's where Sherif and I interact a lot, and CoScreen quite frequently.
Excellent. Can you tell me a bit more about Near in general? What would be your elevator's pitch as to what you're trying to achieve at Near?
I think Sherif has done this more than I have, so I'm going to let him.
Yeah, sure. I'll give it a try. Yeah, I mean, so depending on how much context you have, most people, I think, in 2021 have heard about Bitcoin and Ethereum. And so the idea there is you use all the same infrastructure of the internet to connect computers and people and move data back and forth, the same things that we do with cat pictures and Twitter and Facebook. But then on top of that, you add some algorithms and some cryptography and some architecture that allows us to trust that even if there's somebody with bad intentions, they can't sort of break the network and break the way things behave. And so on top of that trust now, we can layer things that we truly care about that are irreplaceable, like our time, our money, our identity, and sort of some of these big things. So Near is one of these new players in the layer one market, what they call the layer one market, where you can build smart contracts, write code that is effectively law of the land, and this code is then used to run things like contracts, agreements, business operations, and so on. So you can read more about it at near.org, and of course there's a whole world there, but maybe that gives you a high level intro.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I think the topic is fascinating. You're essentially enabling the next frontier of the internet, sort of going back to the roots of decentralization that I think was the initial idea of the internet, but that has somehow been lost in as big platforms have developed. And you're making that accessible for everybody, or at least for a much broader developer community, because I can imagine these things are really tricky to get into otherwise. Can you tell me a bit more about how you're organized at Near and how you work together? Are you a fully remote organization? How many are you?
Yeah, we are. Yeah. I don't know. 60 something, 60? Maybe 50, between 50 and 60. We're growing quite quickly over the last 12 to 18 months. Yeah. But if I had to guess, it's something like 10 countries, 12 countries around the planet. And so, there's quite a bit of remote work. It is a remote first group, and we ended up shutting down some of the sort of the main offices because, of this, 2020 COVID thing that's been going on. And so we've gone even more remote than we were a year ago, 18 months ago.
Has that been a big change for you, going more remote, closing those offices? Or there was
not for me personally. I'm pretty. This is sort of standard operating procedure for many years for me. Willem, is this new for you? Are you used to offices more or remote more?
Definitely offices more. So I actually dropped out of grad school to work for Near, and this was into 2019. So I was used to. I mean, I had a commute to get into school, so I only worked 3 days a week usually. So yeah, it was a bit weird to all of a sudden not interact with people. I did have for a brief moment a co-working space that I was in at the beginning of 2020, which had its own, obviously closed down too. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I think Near is. We had an offsite at the beginning of 2020.
Yeah, that was great.
And a big part of that, one of the things we talked about there and had several meetings about was how to improve the experience, especially the social aspects that are missing. So, we have weekly coffee breaks, and even just our general meetings are more try to leave them open to talking about things outside of work. But yeah, in general, it's still a challenge.
Some ways we compensate for the remoteness, so it doesn't get too disconnected, too lonely. Yeah.
I'm curious though. Like, do you feel like is it working well, or is it something you would like to improve upon even more? I personally find it hard to get that social aspect in, and I can't wait for our next offsite. Well, we haven't had one yet because we actually started during the pandemic, but I can't wait to get together as a team.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we, I definitely look forward to actually meeting people in real life.
Yeah.
And there's definitely as we mentioned before in our previous discussions, the visibility is also the hardest part because, unless you're really broadcasting everything you're doing in this decentralized way, then other coworkers won't see what you're doing as easily. Whereas if you're working in the office, everybody at least then knows you're working.
Yeah.
So I look forward to the next year, and hopefully we'll keep improving it. And hopefully have an offsite.
Yeah. You touched about something there around challenges you faced and this notion of can people tell whether I'm working or not. So how do you compensate for this at Near?
A lot of Slack. A lot of conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean,
output.
Yeah. Output. Yeah. I mean, good pull requests, issues. The more you can. Yeah, but we've gotten large enough where sometimes even those things can if you don't then copy those links to somewhere else, they can get very...
it's not just the doing of it, it's the marketing of it and getting other people to recognize it and repeat it. And
exactly. And the problem can be on
it's about mind share.
I guess on the other end as well, like if you're 60 people, if everyone is every day doing a status update, you won't even get to start your day before you manage to go through all of them, right?
Yeah, that's right. A lot of that stuff gets isolated into channels and then rolled up, basically, right? So you kind of distribute the trust to the edge of the network, where the people that you're working with know what you're doing. They know the quality of your work, and so effectively they vouch for you by referencing you and by using your work and by calling you out. We have some explicit mechanisms as well, like a pride and props channel where you can sort of shout someone's name out, and the sort of flurry of emojis that come in response to that. And so there's quite a few of these mechanisms, implicit and explicit, like what we're talking about. that make a difference. But it does, I mean, it also does favor people who are more outspoken, people who are more likely to self-promote, people who sort of inherently have more visibility because of their role or responsibilities, or because of the the sort of the place in the organization they occupy. So it's not perfect.
And Sherif, because you work, obviously you have a teaching role within NEAR. Is that something you think about as well, sort of how to get those introverts to communicate more and share more of their work?
I can say a lot about this because I've gone through phases of my life. I can also tell you, like, in answer to a question you asked a few minutes ago about remote work and, is it comfortable and do I miss the office? Like, it depends on the life stage. So I have a family with a child now, so I actually prefer being available to, our young daughter to play in the evenings, in between meetings. That would never happen. If I was in an office, I would have to commute. So there are these advantages and stages that we move through. So back to your question about, encouraging students to sort of engage. What I've come to appreciate is that, this is going to sound so, I think the word platitude, comes to mind, sort of these things that people just repeat, whatever, that have no meaning, but everybody's kind of on their own journey, So if someone wants to attend some workshop or something I'm doing and they don't feel like engaging, I'm not going to judge them for that. Whatever's going on for them, that's fine. They may be a private person, they may be busy or preoccupied or something like that. So it's no problem if they don't want to lean into it. But if someone does lean in, all of my energy is conserved for them. And so I can double down on that. Going the extra mile, helping them, engaging them, encouraging them, reviewing their code, whatever it might be, because I haven't it's not sort of dispersed on trying to get people to behave in a way that they don't feel like behaving, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it's important to give people that attention as well to make them feel important. You don't get that in a physical space, like you get that instant type of feedback, but that is not as obvious in a remote context.
Yeah, it's not at all. Yeah.
Which brings me,
right.
say, from an educational perspective in general, what do you think is most important to think about in order to get the message across in a remote environment? I'm sure this is something you do a lot of thinking around.
Sure. I think to make this kind of, to say something that would make sense to people watching this, I think we can start by agreeing that learning is a very lonely process. Like, you could be sitting in a classroom with your best friend of years and feel a million miles away from them because they understand something and you don't, or the opposite. You get it and they don't. And you feel so disconnected and so alone and so isolated from them. This experience, this singular, lonely, isolating experience of confusion, of disorientation, disequilibrium, whatever you want to call it, depending on who you read, like, the idea is the same for all of us. And most of the time, there's a lot of shame associated with this. And so no one's going to raise their hand and say, I'm totally lost. If they do, it's a rare thing. So most of the time, actually what you need is some way to see the person. So a camera is the simple answer. Making sure that if someone's doing something and I really want to get a sense of where they're at, I want to see their face because of the micro expressions and the way that they're sort of holding themselves communicates volumes. And unfortunately, most of the time in a group setting, it's sort of a broadcast. It's not like a classroom or a boardroom or wherever where you can kind of scan the table and see the body language and sort of notice small shifts in posture or expression. So you have to be more deliberate, more explicit, kind of, it's a little bit more a little bit more of this sort of tedious work. Everybody get the idea, please respond this way in the chat or that way, and it's sort of this explicit kind of stuff. But if I can get somebody on camera and I can see their face and talk about something with them, then immediately I can get a read of where they are and whether or not we need to slow down or speed up if they're bored or, double back on something that was sort of foundational to something now that's a little bit unclear, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It's about establishing this connection, right? And I think in the previous conversation,
the connection.
Yeah, you always talked. Also, in the previous conversation we had, you talked about visibility and control and how that plays into the teaching scenario. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, we were talking about it in the context of CoScreen specifically, right? So, like when Willem and I are pairing together, to give you an idea, maybe I'm working on a workshop, as I have with Willem over the last year a couple of times now, and there's something in the system that I lose control over. There's a bug, not quite sure what's going on. Maybe I can tell Willem about it, but if he can see my screen, read the error, and get a sense of the inputs and outputs, what's sort of the context of this problem that we're facing, that gives him visibility. So I've lost control. I sort of give him visibility over it. He can help me regain control of the system. And these two things play together all the time. Forget about code. We could talk about your car. If it doesn't start, you pop the hood. Yeah. If your fridge light is off, you kind of look to see what's going on with it. Is it plugged in or whatever? So we do this in systems everywhere in our life. If we don't have control over the system, if we can't predict its behavior, then we effectively, having lost control, we seek visibility, try and pop the hood or whatever the metaphor is. And so the same thing happens all the time with so many of these systems. And with something like CoScreen, the beauty is that I don't have to be Willem's puppet on the keyboard as he tries to explain to me what to do. I can just hand him control of the computer, for example. So this has been huge. We've saved tens of minutes, if not hours, per day, because he can move so quickly through some of the aspects of the system that I can't, so this has been a big improvement.
And that's of course great to hear. And so you use CoScreen primarily for pairing, do you use it in any other context? Perhaps a question for Willem.
Yeah, I mean, we use CoScreen mainly for preparing on problems, but there's been occasional usages of just well, I'll leave it up, and if somebody wants to watch what I'm doing while I'm doing it, and just hang out while I do it, that's we've done that a couple of times. But most of the time it's I have an issue, here's this CoScreen link, and
so is it fair to say it's mostly used in an ad hoc way rather than for planned sessions when you have or would you say it's both?
I would say it's mainly been ad hoc. I mean, the other limitation is not everybody on our teams use Mac, but for the most part, the people that we've needed to work with have. But yeah, I mean, in the future, I think I see us using it as sort of a replacement for Meet or other video platforms, because the share screen is a lot nicer, and just in general, a shared screen on CoScreen, even if you're not using the aspect of being able to interact with it, does give you a much better image, and you can read it instead of having to get the other screen, which is compressed video, which text does not render as nicely. So
yeah, and we're obviously betting on other platforms as well. We've got a Windows version coming up, and hopefully some more news after that. First out after Windows will be a web client.
Yes.
I'm curious though, aside from CoScreen, like what does your remote collaboration stack look like? What other tools do you use to keep yourself productive? I mean, you mentioned Slack already, so it sounds like you're heavy users of Slack, but I'm sure there's more to it.
We also use Discord and Telegram. Those are our main external the communications with community members, and then just good GitHub, and I'm a big fan of Git Kraken, which is a GitHub has GitHub integration, and it just makes it easy to see, given a repo, what everybody's been working on and where all the branches are, and it lists all the pull requests and issues there. Git Kraken.
There's a local graphical user interface, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
as opposed to I believe I used it at some point.
And you can use it to create pull requests, and so that's been a very useful tool for me to jump in between different projects and feel like I'm not losing time catching up on what's been happening and
And you mentioned Discord as well. So that's not an internal communications tool for you. That's something you use with your community.
I mean, ideally, all of our discussions should be publicly available on GitHubs and on Discord or Telegram, so that the community can hear what we're chatting about. But for the most part, our discussions are pretty public. It's just private discussions are on Slack, and maybe sending these CoScreen links that you don't necessarily want everybody to have access to. But and I could also imagine using something like CoScreen for workshops and such, just so that then, as Sherif was mentioning, it's one thing to be in discussion of just explaining something. But when you actually get to the workshop part of it, debugging someone's code by being able to just pull up a screen and see what they're looking at right away would be invaluable, because
edit that.
Yeah,
work,
and edit. Yeah.
Do share as you come across new use cases as well. We're always curious to know more about how people make use of CoScreen.
Nice. Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to add to what Willem was saying there. I think CoScreen is the only. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's the only platform that we use. I was trying to think of what's the difference between how I think of CoScreen in my workflow and these other tools. It's the only tool that we use in 3 modes, where we have, the ad hoc sessions, here's a link, let's meet. We do that with other technology as well. We also, might put a CoScreen link into a calendar invite or some scheduled event as the place that we will, connect. But then it also has sort of this always on effect. So Willem's been gracious enough sometimes where I'm struggling with something and I don't have a specific question, but I know I will at some point. He just sort of leaves his CoScreen on. He says, yeah, just hop into my room whenever you're ready. I'm here. And it's basically, he's just sitting at his desk saying, stop by, whenever you want. So that doesn't really work in most of these other systems. You don't typically leave one of these meeting rooms open or what have you. And so I can just sort of pop in and say hey and ask him what he's working on, and then kind of he'll field my question or whatever it might be. So there's a few modes that we can play with that don't necessarily work with some of these other tools. I think that's been one of the nice bits for me.
Yeah, and I think also there's a lot of talk about the asynchronous work today, especially in the remote context. That's something we adhere to as well. We work more asynchronously, but we also realize that to solve some of those trickier tasks, you need to connect synchronously, and that often happens on an ad hoc basis, right? Because you want to resolve it there and then. So I think this open door policy is a very interesting way of going about that, and I guess creating an environment also where it's okay to pop in quickly to disturb someone in order to be able to progress. Sure. Look, I realize we're running a bit short on time, so I want to finish by asking you, with 2020 behind us, it was a tough year, I think, for all of us. What are you most looking forward to in 2021? Hoping things will be a bit easier.
Well,
yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that we can have offsites and there's, even though we are split up into different places across the planet, whether there are East Coast colleagues that I could visit with, and but yeah, I mean, and again, I think a lot of people were forced into working towards remote work in a meaningful way, we had already had that as a goal, before 2020. So, I hope that we continue down that road and find ways to be more inclusive, not only just for colleagues, but the community at large, and, make people feel more connected in this, very disconnected reality we have right now.
Yeah, I think it's a good way of putting it, feeling more connected in the disconnected reality. Sherif?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, no surprise. I miss spending time with human beings in group. In a classroom setting or a workshop setting, especially if I'm not responsible for the agenda, if I'm learning with other people, there's really nothing like it. It's a very satisfying experience, I find, to share, that moment of confusion with other people and kind of laugh about how overwhelming it is sometimes. But I also, I guess, if I hope something for 2021, and if the sky's the limit on what we can wish for, I would say, I don't know, I'd like to meet 1,000 new teachers, who are interested in collaborating on some of this urgent work that we have in the tech space, where things are, the tech is outpacing us as individuals.